Okay, well, welcome back to our series, looking at some big questions and how that is a part of Christianity, how we can respond from Christianity. I'm here with Sam, and today we want to think a little bit more about the idea of diversity. So we started this last time thinking specifically about sexism and whether that is a part of Christianity. And we recognize that there's a lot more to say about diversity. And so that's what we want to do today. Now we're going to think about this from like a multicultural perspective, and we want to say at the beginning that we recognize both Sam and I are white and we are British. That does not discredit anything that we're going to say. We recognize that we represent right now a small aspect of the multicultural world, but we want to open that up, right? We want to look at that as a wider topic, what the Bible has to say, and so hopefully we will do that today. Hopefully this will be interesting for you. So first of all, we recognize that actually history, a lot of what Christian missionaries have done in the past, it has been sort of white Westerners sort of going into different cultures and bringing sort of their experience of life to them. And there have been some problems there. There's been some brilliant work through mission in the past. But Sam, do you want to just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I do. And I think that's absolutely right when you say we're white British, and to a certain extent, we're implicated in what's going on in the past. And to a certain extent, we do want to wash our hands of it a little bit and say, actually, a lot of missionaries, when they went out there, did go in and not only preach Christianity, they also preached Western culture, particularly Victorian British culture. So I was reading about David Livingstone, this book here. And what really struck me is that he went in as a Christian missionary. He was actually not a very successful Christian missionary because a large part of his mindset was actually very imperialistic. He thought that by going and introducing Western, particularly Victorian British economics into Africa, he would therefore open up the continent to the gospel. He made one convert, I think, and that convert lapsed. So not a very successful missionary, but you can understand why people like him, great man though he was in many ways, an absolutely extraordinary man, but today is slightly in disrepute because of what he did that did crush diversity actually, and did treat the African cultures as secondary to his own culture, which wasn't exactly part of his Christian message, but could have been perceived as that. So I think it's important for us to recognize, and you could say a bit about this, Hannah, that when he was going in and preaching the gospel, he was taking his culture in blindly, but that's not where the gospel originated, is it?
Absolutely not. And you look at kids' Bible books, art across our world throughout history. Jesus is often presented himself as a white man. That wouldn't have been his identity. That is not the part of the world that he was from. And so where the gospel originated, where the church grew, it wasn't in the West. The West has run with Christianity, and I guess to a certain extent we might see that part of our world as sort of the hub, but that just isn't part of history. It started in a very different part of the world with a very different culture, and actually is massively growing today, more so in those parts of the world, and it's really exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, also I think we can point to Christian doctrine throughout the centuries, which is that it's a standard Christian truth accepted widely throughout church history, that God is the absolute creator of the universe. And so we not only need to look at where Christianity started, but also what it teaches. It teaches that God created everything. There are only two things that exist: God and everything God created. And he didn't just sort of set the world in motion and then step back and let it be. He sustains it every single moment of its existence by his own desire, by his own plan, by his own will. And so every piece of diversity that we see around us is actually a product of God's desire for his creation. And actually, it should lead us to worship God for all of his creativity and his wisdom.
Yeah. And we see that in the life of Jesus, don't we? Actually, his approach to people, his how he dealt with diversity. The video that we did in the first part of this series, thinking about sexism, we spoke about the Samaritan woman, noted that there were actually two massive barriers that Jesus overcame in addressing her. One was gender. Men and women wouldn't have conversed in the way that Jesus did with this woman, particularly in public. But a massive one was race. He was a Jew, she was a Samaritan. But that was a barrier that did not exist for Jesus. He did not let that stop him as he shared the good news that he came to do. There really was no barrier in that for him. And I guess when we look forward, Revelation is a picture of what is to come. It tells us so much about what the new world will be like when Jesus returns. And in Revelation 7 verse 9, it says this: "After I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb." Like, what an amazing picture of diversity and the world coming together with
Yeah, I
race,
think that's
language,
just
tongue, right? Everything.
awesome. Yeah, and I think like we're particularly privileged to live when we do, because communication between all these different cultures is so easy. We actually kind of benefit from that a little bit now. So, I've got a couple of books here from different people around the world. I've got Conquering Storms of Life, written by a Ugandan minister. There's this very famous book, The Normal Christian Life by Watchman Nee, a Chinese writer. Preaching God's Big Story. This is one that's written by people from all over the world. And you really see, actually, when you're reading these books, that they're bringing their culture into it, and they're giving you a different viewpoint. And just to add to what you said before, Hannah, as well, there's another verse in Revelation, again, talking about the new creation, this holy city representing God's new creation. Revelation 21:26, which says, "The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it." And I just think, why would it say that unless the glory and honor of each individual nation was slightly different? And it's bringing in all this diversity together to celebrate it. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Just as we finish, I'd love to share a story from my last church. So I used to work for a church in Canterbury. Canterbury's a university city. It's a diverse place because of that. And there was one Sunday, it was September, so we were in the season of welcoming lots of new students. And in doing that, everybody in the congregation who spoke another language, either as their mother tongue or one that they'd learned, was asked to come to the front of the church and stand and welcome people in their own language, in another language. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that half of the church stood up and half of the church moved forward. And we heard this array of different languages, all made by God, all loved by him. And it was a picture of that Revelation 7 verse 9, in that one day all things will come together under God. That includes nationality, that includes race, that includes culture. And we do see small snippets of that now, not all the time. And there are many times where that is not the case, but we do see it. And what a thing to celebrate.
Definitely. It's awesome.
Great.